bad guys only want one of three things: property, body, or life. It's a short list. The guy says to me, starts small talking, and he goes, "What do you do?" And I go, "I teach self-defense, combatives." He goes, "Cool. Like, how long?" I said, "Oh, like 40 years." He says, "You've had the same job for 40 years?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Like, that's amazing, man." He says, "Most people don't."
That's true.
And it never occurred to me.
Even people who are entrepreneurs don't. Like, they just go off
this for 5 years, 2 years, close this, start that.
But that's where real mastery is. That's why I'll be watching like a random YouTube show. And actually, who was I watching? Fieldcraft Survival.
Okay.
And Mike Glover was making a cameo on a dude who's a SEAL.
Sean Ryan
show. And then so I'm like, I watching both of those shows and like, oh shit, they're dropping Tony's name. Like, that's how legendary you are. You know what I mean?
Like, crazy.
Two worlds who really, Army and Navy, who kind of are competitive.
Yeah.
Know you.
And so I remember there's another very famous guy, Army, retired, huge on Instagram now. And he's hanging out with a buddy of mine who's a world famous kickboxing. He was at a tactical show in Texas. And I said, "Hey, Kung, let me get a picture with Tu and you." And so I go, "Hey, look, man, huge fan." And where I caught his attention, or how he got my attention, he was using my high gear helmet in one of his videos. So I'm like, how badass is that, right?
That's nuts.
And so I say to him, "Hey, sir, I just want to thank you for your service. And so cool that you use the high gear. And it's just good to meet you." He said, "Oh, Mr. Blauer," he says, "we met 26 years ago. He says, you taught me a combatives course at Fort Bragg at Range 37, at the SIF unit." He said, "that changed my whole paradigm on how to prepare." And so he said, "Thank you." But that, I was like, oh, like when he was just a kid going through.
Ain't that nuts?
It freaks me out because I don't, like when I get up in the morning, I feel 60 sometimes.
Right.
But I'm still like 22 in my head.
And that's really what matters, is that cognitive piece.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cognitive piece. And then you add 43 years of experience and you've got mastery in a very specific area, and that's your gift.
Thank you.
Right?
I'd stopped teaching group classes about 15 years ago as I was scaling my company and have a training cadre, a mobile training team. We've got trainers all over the world. At one point, we were like 21 strong. I have about 11 really solid people that I trust to go teach. And so sometimes people will go, "Hey, do you ever teach?" And they know it's been decades that I don't teach.
Yeah.
I'll show up and I'll wave like the Queen sometimes and do a little talk. And
do you need me to move this closer, Ed?
No, you can.
And
by the way, we've officially started. You're good with that?
Yeah.
Awesome. This all stays in there.
I love it. Even his cameo, he did that. That's like
That's right.
That's like
even his cameo.
Monsters Inc. He's trying to get in there, right? And so I forget what I was saying. Who were you just talking about?
Training cadre.
Yeah.
Who? Oh yeah, cadre.
Yeah.
So thank you.
And you wave like the Queen.
Yeah, wave like the Queen. And but when I was 15 years old, my mom said to me, and I started martial arts and doing my training. I'm on the floor trying to work on the splits. I'm like scouring Bruce Lee magazines, and I know a lot of people think they're the world's biggest Bruce Lee fan, but I was, and that's a joke.
How many times have you been in like Black Belt magazine? Or on the cover?
I don't know. I've been in hundreds of magazines, but I've been on I guess 6 or 7 covers, different martial art magazines, Black Belt and Inside Karate and a few different magazines in Australia, in the UK. But what made me think about the story about the MTT and stopping teaching was you said to me, like 43 years later, like all of that becomes, you call it mastery. It was interesting. I was talking to a guy and I said, "I'm just so passionate." He said, "You're not passionate, man. You're obsessed." And I think that's why you're successful. You're obsessed. We sometimes use a more touchy-feely or
Probably like a more socially acceptable
socially
term,
word,
right?
like, oh, I'm very passionate, but you work 7 days a week. You're obsessed. I work 7 days a week. I'm obsessed.
Yeah.
And
I don't want the breaks. Like
Right.
I may burn myself out, and then I'll take a break.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I'm not looking for a break.
right, because it's who you are. It's what you do. And I didn't realize this, and this is a really neat thing that occurred recently. While I was trying to grow the business, I realized I had to pull myself out, because if I had to teach every single class, forget that. And our program was really unique. It was very hands like I look at every human as a human weapon. Ironically, the shirt you're wearing.
Now, by the way, I'm going to have a one-off made.
Right.
It's going to say, like, sex machine.
Sex machine.
And especially with your name on it, the fact that you Tony Blauer
Right.
endorses that Bedros is a sex machine,
Right.
forget it. I'm going platinum.
I dig it, and I think you'll sell a lot of them.
You'll be happy to know, by the way, Jason Ferrugia, the dude
Right.
that we're going on to dinner with tonight, was my first guest on the BK Strength
I
Show.
know that. I
And
know that. I
the
remember
irony
that.
that you brought him one of these shirts, and I asked Tony not to give him one, just to stick
Mess
it to
it up.
Jay.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
It's the right thing to do.
We'll delay it. No, Jay's a great guy, and I'm excited to
He
have
is.
dinner with you guys.
Yeah.
So I'm 15 years old. I'm on the floor and I'm working on the splits. I'm looking at Bruce Lee stuff. My mom says to me, "Hey, so, and I'm from a suburban family. This is 1975.
What part of Canada, by the way, did you
Montreal.
live in?
East
Montreal.
Coast, yeah.
Okay, so you speak French?
My heckler. Well, I speak very poor French.
But did you at some point? I mean, obviously,
you
many
had-
years
you
you've
had-
been in the
you had
States.
to. But people who speak French like make faces at me when I try to speak French. So like,
Gotcha.
please don't do it. You
Yeah.
know?
Then in which case, I want to ask you.
Right. But for you, I'll probably sound great. But like
Right.
I'm from Paris. But no, it's horrible French. But anyway, so my mom, like back then, is like, you're going to the family business. My dad ran a manufacturing import-export ladies clothing, high-end clothing, and it was his father's business. So it was like passed down. Are you going to the family business, and then you had like two choices. You're going to be a lawyer or a doctor. Those are the
Yeah.
things, right? And I looked up at her and I said, Mom, I'm not really going to school. I'm going to become a famous martial artist like Bruce Lee. I'm going to develop my own system. And she looks at me and she pat me on the head because I'm looking up at her. And she says, "Okay, dear, we'll talk about this when you're older." I knew then this is all I wanted to do. And something interesting happened recently, and I didn't realize this, is as I was trying to figure out where to go with the business, and I started hiring people and training people, and I had to make them, like if you started to work for me, I couldn't show up in class and go, "Hi, it's," because people wanted me, I
Right.
developed the system. So I had to literally not show up, just cold turkey, go. And in the beginning, it was like, "Hey, is Tony coming? Is Tony coming?" And then it was like nobody expected me. And then if I did show up, people would go, "Oh, I didn't expect you to be here.
Yeah.
So cool to meet you." But what I never realized is when I transitioned to scale, I'd given up the most important thing. And this was, I wanted to be a self-defense instructor. I wanted to teach people. I wanted to have group classes. I wanted to have a community, a tribe. And what was amazing in the last few months when everything got locked down, and like all of my training revenue is live in person. And in a couple of days, Bedros, like I went from, okay, this isn't so bad, to, oh my God, I could lose my business and my house and everything I worked for. And I went deep in the fear loop in a couple of days. I was like holy shit. And then it was actually Weatherford I was talking to says to me, he goes, I go, "Dude, like, I don't know what to do. Can I swear on the show? Too late."
Yeah.
And
Yeah, too late.
and beep. And he goes, "Aren't you like a famous self-defense guy?" I go, "Kinda." He goes, "Why don't you teach out of your garage?" And so I wrote a letter, sent it out to my list, and had like 100 people sign up that week. And I started teaching, and I said to my wife Jess, who's the heckler in the crowd today, the first day I said, I am so nervous. And she goes, like, what the hell could you possibly be nervous about? And I said, I haven't taught a group class. She says, you teach all the time. You're always doing webinars. You're always talking. You do keynotes. You do. And I was like, no, this is different. I was having like this flashback to me preparing for a class and wanting it to be so good for the class. And then, on top of that, it was Zoom. But it's the best thing. Like if someone said, hey, the world's open tomorrow, go back to, I'm not stopping this. It's what it's marrying is something that you intuitively said. It's the passion I had that drove me as a teenager, but now I've got 43 years of knowledge on brain science and neuroscience and fear management and violence and all these stats. So I'm blending like this 60-year-old brain with this 20-year-old.
And that's
vitality.
deadly, dude. That is deadly. Like you realize you have seen more and have probably forgotten more than most people in their 20s and 30s will know about the fear loop, the stress response. Like one of the greatest stories I remember hearing from you was about that professional fighter, like an MMA fighter, like a UFC fighter, who just destroys people in the ring, but how he went into a panic and he thought like the bad guy that broke into his house.
Home invasion, yeah.
Yeah, during a home invasion.
Anthony
he was like,
Smith.
holy crap.
Yeah.
And you explained it to me so well because, well, we'll get to it in a moment, but the stuff that you explain that I realize, and this is why I also love reading books, is how else am I going to get 20 years of knowledge on fear and stress response other than living it?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm 46 right now, and I could just talk to you and get 43 years by asking the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
They say a question well phrased is already half answered. And by phrasing the right questions to Tony Blauer, I'm going to understand so much more about the stress response, fear response, flinch, and how we have a built-in mechanism to defend ourselves that I didn't even know about, right? And we'll get all to that in a moment. You just talked about the fear loop. Enlighten the audience about the fear loop.
So in the 80s, I had backtrack 79, 80, 1980. One of my students gets his ass kicked in a fight. And I had been training him. I loved wrestling. I loved boxing. I loved Taekwondo. Those were my 3 arts. So it was like, this was mixed martial arts before there was mixed martial arts.
Yeah, before MMA, the words existed.
And to the credit of other innovators out there, Bruce Lee was doing this. He had blended stuff. Some of the masters from Kaja Kempo. There's other arts where people said, well, let's take some grappling and some striking, some kicking. So I didn't invent MMA, but I was doing it, blending my own journey. I had started off wrestling as a kid. Back in the late 60s, you didn't think of wrestling as your base for MMA because it didn't exist.
Right.
The only school I got jumped when I was 12. That's kind of my origin story, and I never even thought about it. Those terms, someone was interviewing me, and that came up, and I said I got jumped by these 2 guys, and then I went home and told my dad, and I didn't get hurt at all. I said, hey, I just got beaten up, and he said, like, did they have pillows? Like, because there was no blood or swelling.
Wait, your dad really said that?
Yeah,
did they have
he
pillows?
said, like, what did they beat you up? Like pillows? Like it was a pillow fight?
To which you responded?
I was like, Dad, I got beaten up. It was scary, But it was 1972 and a half, and then Bruce Lee passed away in 73, and it was always on my mind. And when the only school near me, a Taekwondo school, opened up, and I had to walk a mile if my parents couldn't give me a lift.
Yeah.
But I trained all the time. I fell in love with it. And I felt like this was going to help me. For some reason, I always was afraid my whole life. But even now, I make the joke because I have a fear management program. I start off my talks that fear management needs new management because there's a stigma, especially men, like we don't use the word fear. No, I'm not afraid. Like we don't want that perception of vulnerability or what have you. So I started those 3 arts. Taekwondo is the only, system that was near me. I got in a fight in high school where I couldn't use my kicks, and I realized I was missing hands. So as soon as I was getting my driver's license, like 6 months after, I started going to a boxing club, fell in love with boxing, and I was blending all that stuff. And then my first student, this kid Mitchell, what was I teaching him? I was teaching him how to jab, how to slip, how to parry, how to kick, how to clinch. And I was teaching him all the physical stuff, right? And he gets in a fight and gets his ass kicked. And he's telling me what happened. And I'm like, dude, what? Like, he goes, and then the guy dropped me with a left hook. And I'm like, Mitchell, why didn't you fucking zig or zag or check or parry all the that I taught you? And he goes, he's like a 15-year-old kid. He says, well, I was holding my books in my right hand and I was holding them by the shirt.
And I ran out of hands.
So like, imagine if you had to box somebody holding him like this. He's going to just punch you in the face.
That exact scenario happened to me as a kid.
Really?
I realize now, like, to drop everything, right? But I remember, and I wasn't holding, it wasn't books, it was actually my book bag.
Right.
And I found myself trying to defend myself with just one hand. And of course, I'm a left-handed person. So
you're holding
I'm using my best, strongest arm to hold my book bag. And when this guy came after school to start trouble with me, I just didn't have enough sense or whatever's required, which I'm sure you'll explain, to put my book bag down. And now with my right side, and I'm a lefty, I'm trying to defend myself. And ultimately, the best thing you can do is grab onto something and then create distance with your arm. But whatever you have there, a yard is all you have.
I was nailing you.
And he was just raining punches on me, right? And common sense in hindsight would have said, maybe you put the book bag down. You just drop it.
So here's the thing about that.
Why don't we do that?
There's a part of our physiological system called the cross extensor reflex. And it's, if you go to electrical school and you're going to study electricity, they tell you always, if you're going to check if a wire's live, they always tell you to check with the back of your hand, because if that reflex kicks in and you grab the wire, that's where they're going to find you. So there's this cross extensor reflex that pushes away danger. That's really how I figured out how to weaponize the startle flinch. Not the electrical school, I found that out after. Right. But what happens is, if I scare you, when you flinch, there's a micro contraction, and the micro contraction is this: you get tight, right? And if your hands are holding onto anything, it clamps down. So why you didn't let go is because when you got scared or you held your breath, or you went, oh shit, that guy, everything locks up on what you're holding. We do a drill in our military law enforcement, and even in the courses for the general public, where we teach people to actively engage. Let me sidestep. In a high stress situation, executive function gets hijacked by your survival system.
Give me an example of an executive function.
Executive function is this idea of, I'm going to put down my book bag because I want to keep my hands free. So executive function is like this high level reasoning for your cognitive brain. If I ask you, you're a grappler, what would you do here if a guy did this? I'd double leg and take him down. If you're a Taekwondo guy, what would you do here, Bedros? Oh, I'd create space and I'd kick him in the head. So our cognitive brain, executive function, supplies all our theoretical answers of what we're going to do. What's so interesting about this, and this is actually the longest answer to you asked me about the fear loop, is you can go to Harvard and learn how to run a business, and then you can learn on the street, you can do it, but if you can't manage the stress, right? So why you're exceptionally successful is because I believe I know your story well, and I read your book and listened to you talk many times. It's the duress and adversity that you experienced coming over here and growing up here and going from a worrier to a warrior, right? And finding out that, because it's not the mechanics. The mechanics are, okay, I'm going to hire a lawyer to figure out this and explain this, and then you understand it. But it's, a real entrepreneur and a real survivor in any sense has grit, has resiliency, has adaptive courage. And you may not be able to articulate it or teach it, but when you look at the commonality between people who survive and thrive versus the people that don't, it's these tangible esoteric mindset things. It's not a technique, it's not there's no technique to it. So the whole fear loop actually evolved out of my student, this is nice serendipity, out of my student Mitch losing this fight. Because when he told me what happened, and he said, well, I was holding my school books and I had grabbed the guy by the shirt. When he shoved me, I grabbed him and threatened him not to threaten me, right? And the guy hit him with a left hook. And I always tell this story. I said, it's like the god of self-defense hit me with a lightning bolt. And I realized in 1980, we teach self-defense wrong. And I literally said, we collectively, and some people might think that's grandiose for a 20-year-old, but I was like, it's not that all trainers are malicious. We teach what we believe is the right thing to do. But I realized I hadn't taught Mitchell anything about, and I got more elegant words now, scenario-based training, emotional, psychological duress, and how to manage that. And I immediately said to him, "Are those your books?" And he said, "What? The books on your desk?" He goes, "Yeah, grab your books and grab me." And we reverse engineered what was happening. And I started to play around, and I knew I was onto something. And that day forward, everything we did for self-defense was based on a scenario. And then that scenario, when you reverse engineer it, we start talking about the moral and ethical legal aspects of it. We started talking about what happened before I had to do that. Like if you learn self-defense, so you're studying jiu-jitsu. 99% of all that training starts on the ground in a position because it's a ground art. If you're studying Taekwondo, it would start at a kicking range. If you're studying boxing, it would be at a striking range. Every system has an unconscious bias that you practice to set up its go-to moves, right? The problem with that in the real world is there are three distinct phases in any confrontation. There's a detect and avoid stage, what we call D1. There's a defuse and de-escalate stage, D2. And then if a push comes to shove, there's a D3, defend. It's the hammer nail metaphor, right? All you have is a hammer, everything's a nail.
Right.
If you only practice how to get out of a headlock, you have to wait till you're in a headlock
To get out of
to get out of the headlock.
Right.
So, so we build this whole thing. This whole system evolved, and you know this. Just to share some insight with your listeners, is this evolved out of that event in the 80s. But here we are, decades later. Like we teach this methodology in the programming and the reverse engineering design to Department of Defenses all over the world, to military, to law enforcement, SWAT, to martial artists.
And for the longest time, by the way, that was your zone. Like civilians didn't have access to you. I mean, you were working with the top of the top in our military.
Still are, but we
right.
Yeah, still are.
What made you want to branch out and start helping civilians?
It's tricky. This is an interesting thing. Is the civilians, the citizens, don't want it. They've outsourced their safety. I got really tired. I go, so you're a scrapper in business and in life. So if we had bumped into each other 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and you said, "What do you do?" I go, "I teach personal defense." What do you mean? It's a scenario-based approach to, and we started talking. I teach you how to weaponize the startle flinch. I teach you how to manage fear. I teach you what are the 12 common scenarios that you and your family are. If something's going to happen, it's going to happen in one of these 12 scenarios. You might go, "Holy shit, I got to learn this." It's almost like, what do you do? Pretend there's no seatbelts. I developed a seatbelt. What the hell's a seatbelt? It's to prevent you from going through your windshield in a car. There's this many car accidents, and I can install one. No, I'm okay, thanks. Like, why wouldn't you want an airbag?
Right.
Right. It's stupid. We know airbags save lives. So the whole weaponizing the startle flinch is like an organic airbag. It deploys to create space between you and attacker. But for years, I was trying to. When I was 20, I got introduced. I was teaching privately in Montreal, and one of the guys I was still haven't answered the fear loop question. And one of the guys that I was teaching, this guy Rick, real estate mogul there, I was teaching his son. He says to me, "You do things differently. You got this X factor." And I go, "What's the X factor?" He says, "Never mind. I'm going to introduce you to a VC buddy of mine." I go, "What's VC?" He goes, "Never mind. Go to this meeting." And of course, everyone knows now what venture capital, right? Yeah. So I get into this meeting and he goes, "Rick says you got the X factor. How can I help you?" I said, "I don't know. He told me to come to this meeting." He said, "Well, what do you do? What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to make the world safer." He leans towards me. He leans back in his chair. And he goes, "You want to make the world safer?" I go, "Yeah."
That's kind of a broad stroke of the brush that you just made.
He goes and he says to me, talk about broad stroke. He says, "You don't think it's a little grandiose?" And I'm like thinking, would making the world safer be? But that's the vision. And I've been relentless every single day since that. So I started off trying to make the world safer, and I would go up to you and I go, hey, psst, want to buy a watch? It would be like, hey, you want to learn how to protect yourself and your family? No, I'm okay. I live in a nice neighborhood. Hey, you want to learn how to protect your family? Oh, nothing ever happens where I live. To fatalist, what can you do? If it's your day, it's your. The more I talk to the general public, the less they wanted it. They have a buddy of mine. You ever read Violence is Golden?
No.
By Jack Donovan? You should read that. You'll love that. So Jack had me on his podcast a few years ago, and he said, the general public has outsourced their safety.
That's such a powerful term.
I love that line. It's like, every man and woman should know how to protect themselves. Forget what's going on in the world right now, which just amplifies the obvious. But think about this. If you got a tummy ache, and I use the word tummy on purpose, are you going to stick a tube down your throat and try to see what's going on? Or are you going to
Probably not.
go to a doctor, right?
Right.
If your roof starts to leak, are you going to YouTube roof repair, or are you going to
call a roofer?
Car's not working, right? So every problem that you need to solve, there's an expert. There's only one problem you have no time to call an expert to solve, and that's sudden violence. So think about everything that you're worth, emotionally, psychologically. I talk about like emotional, psychological wealth. Forget all the wealth, the actual wealth you've created, and everyone that depends on you. There's only one event in your life that you don't even time to dial 911, and the digits to call a tow truck are 7 digits. 911's 3. In a real violent encounter, you don't even have time to dial 911. You're the first responder in your fight, and so I was obsessed with creating a program. We ended up creating a program called Be Your Own Bodyguard. And it's taught with the efficiency of like a paramedic teaching a CPR course. It's a 1-day course. Now, you tell somebody in the martial arts world, this guy Blauer's got this 1-day course to teach self-defense, and they'll go, that's bullshit, you can't. Because they're confusing mastery of martial arts with learning how to defend yourself. If I said to you, I'm going to teach you how to use a fire extinguisher, and I'm going to teach you how to pull the pin, how to spray. We're going to go to Costco. We're going to get a bunch of like cheap little ones.
Dude, you were so polarizing. I can't imagine that you weren't shunned and they probably discredited by so much of the martial arts space. Am I right in saying that?
Oh yeah, very. And you're not in the industry, so it's kind of amazing that you're able to.
Like, well, because in any industry, like when I took personal training from 60 minutes to 30 minutes, everyone's like, oh my God, you can't do it. And it's like, no, 60 minutes is a therapy session. Personal training, we can knock it out in 30 minutes. And then when we said, hey, we're going to take these outdoor boot camps and make them the standard for indoor training, group training, can't do it, right? And everything about my industry, I was hated and doubted on. And I figure like,
same.
You saying that in 1 day, I can teach someone to weaponize their startle flinch response. Like my simple monkey brain goes, oh, well, I believe that. There's probably some basic stuff you can teach me. I'm not going to master all of martial arts,
of course,
but I bet you can teach me some stuff that are going to keep me safer and be able to protect my family more. Yet the experts or the masters in your space
hated.
So how did you even, let's talk about that for a moment. Let's take a little zig. And how do you even process through your industry that you were so passionate about, that you told mom that I'm going to go create my own martial arts and I love this world so much, now all of a sudden are kind of turning their back on you?
Yeah, decades of that. And it still goes on to this day, just less and less. It actually, ironically, it's one of the reasons I left trying to teach martial arts to the general public. I was, because of the scenario training I created in the 80s, I developed the high gear suit, which eventually the U.S. Army bought $17 million worth of it for their combatives program, and it revolutionized force on force training and all that. And can
you describe the high gear suit? Because I think it's the coolest thing ever.
It's head to toe. It looks like body armor. It's very futuristic. It's funny because you'll see in futuristic, like Army Times, ballistic wear that they're trying to do, looks like the sketches I made back in 1993. But this isn't ballistic. You can't shoot it. You can't stab it. But what you can do, it's an impact reduction design. It's head to toe. It's about 10 pounds. And I tease people, it's like a grappling mat you can wear. So we could put it on, headbutt each other, elbow each other, fall down in the parking lot, actually replicate real violence. Where normally, we'd go, hey, you want to grapple? You'd put the mats down. You go, watch out for that. Move this equipment because you want to bang into things.
Right.
So this is like 360-degree coverage. There's some openings. You got to be careful. But it takes you from, well, here's what I would do to you in a fight. And you go, yeah, well, I would do this to you. And I go, well, put the gear on and let's see it. Because I want people, it wasn't about any dick measuring. It was always about, don't you want to know what works before the real fight? Even your anaerobic efficiency. Don't you want to know? I remember doing something down years ago when I lived in Canada. I came down and I did a gig down in Coronado for the boys down there, and we were doing it was a week-long training course, and we were doing this movement. Coming under an attack and grabbing a guy and spinning him and taking him down to the ground to flex tie him. And one of the guys says, this is a cool move, but will it work with our plates on? So there's ceramic body armor. And I said, I don't know, I've never done it with plates on. And they said, I just thought I would ask. And I go, well, we're on the base, like how far are the plates? He goes, in that room. I go, can we get them? He goes, yeah. So we put them on, and this would be a happy ending if I said, yes, my move worked, but it didn't work with the plates. It changed the articulation of the body.
Sure.
I said, we need to know that before
Better
the fight.
to find out there than on the battlefield.
Right, exactly. So that was the whole point of the high gear suit. But what I did, and I forget where I was going with this, because I forget what you were asking me. Oh, I was trying to get the high gear. You asked me, about the rejection and the animosity and all that. So I built the high gear suit. It took me 5 years. Talk about resiliency and 5 years to figure out who can make it, because when people hear protective gear, they think bulky.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting as if you've ever seen the Red Man or the Fist suits, they're really bulky. And so I said, no, I don't want to change the proximity sense. That's our ability to gauge distance.
I was going to ask you how it's different than the Red Man suit.
Yeah. So the Red Man suit is like a big heavy bag, and the high gear suit's like focus pads, right? And they're literally that thin. But the focus pad is used like if you got a good coach, he's moving around, you're picking targets, and you're working on speed, timing, and accuracy. And the Red Man suit slows down the role player. And I'm friends with the guys at Red Man. So Red Man, it's a great.
Oh, I think it's a great product for what it is and was.
It's an academy level suit where an instructor needs to get hit by 40 students. He wants big, bulky.
In fact, we use it at the project during a part where our lead instructor, Ray, the Navy SEAL, wears it and surprise attacks a person in this very room, actually, in the dark. Yeah. And he has to do that with 20 different guys.
Yeah, no, he needs the bulky.
He'd be
after 3 guys, he'd be.
But I bet you the high gear suit would work even better.
It's funny. We'll bring it in one time, but he may hate us for that because the high gear suit is designed with an impact reduction quality. So we use very, very thin. So why that is if you put the Red Man suit on and I go whack and I kick you, you'll go, good kick, Tony. If I kick you with the high gear suit, you might take a knee and go, that was a good kick.
Yeah.
Like impact reduction means impact reduction. There's still penetrating, energy's going in. Why I designed it that way specifically is I wanted you to put the suit on and still be afraid of what I might do. When I eliminate, and like fear is my avatar, fear is my everything. It's like, and this is you asked me. I can finally answer the fear loop question from 2 days ago.
In the final 32 seconds, I want you to answer that. That way, we bring it full circle.
So we did scenario training from 1980 to 1993 without gear, and then it took me 5 years from to 1993 is when we've launched our first production of the gear. Yeah. But what I realized was that.
So when you did scenario training then without gear,
Frankenstein.
Okay, you guys just put whatever on.
Yeah, hockey helmets, remember I was from Canada, hockey gauntlets, taekwondo chest guard, baseball shin guards. We just put it on and
because you still needed contact.
Oh, yeah.
It's the only way you're gonna be able to-
I knew we did stuff. I got a videotape out. I got we started recording videos, old VHS videos. Most of you don't even know what VHS is. You're gonna have to Google that. But we would record these things. We were like just beating the shit out of each other and watching it. And we were doing Fight Club before Fight Club was a thing. We once a month, and we'd have guys come in, like street fighters from Montreal and martial artists and doormen, and because they heard about this thing, and they'd come in, they'd sign a waiver, and we would do things like you'd sign up, and I'd go. It was so cool, man. It was I go, okay, Bedros, what's your scariest scenario in a street? And you might say 3 guys with a gun or whatever, and I would use those as people got acclimated and did the drills. I go, okay, Bedros, you're up next. Go sit over there, put your gear on. And then I go, if it was 2 guys, mugging, we would start that off like that.
Create the scenario.
So it would immediately trigger a physiological adrenaline dump in you. So you've sped somewhere and almost got a ticket, right? You're coming over a hill, you're late for a meeting, and you see a cop and you're like, ah, shit. And then you realize he's looking down, he's writing a ticket. What happened to your body 3 seconds later? You still got an adrenaline dump.
Yeah.
Your heart started, but you're like driving, you're not doing anything anaerobic, but you're still like almost out of breath, vertically breathing. So your body, what I discovered is your body can't distinguish between, or differentiate between a synthetic trigger and an actual trigger. So you could use these scenarios, if you replicated them properly, to teach people how to breathe properly, how to focus properly, how to practice verbal and de-escalation strategies when they're like, hey man, like someone's panicking, and I've had like students hyperventilating, panicking, crying, and I had to come up with stuff to guide them through this stuff. Because the scariest thing, I tell people, fear throttles everything we do, from who you talk to, therefore who you marry, how much money you make, where you work, how much weight you lift, and most importantly, whether or not you defend yourself. And at the end of the day, like I said earlier, whether it's an attack in business, whether it's something in a relationship, or the most scary of all confrontations, physical confrontation with a fucking predator. Because in that moment, all the other stuff can resolve itself. And like I was saying, you can call every expert, but when shit's happening to you, but here's what I noticed doing scenarios. Only the people that manage their fear manage to fight. And that line blew my mind. Like when I realized, here's a little girl, she's a sexual assault victim. She's sitting over there, she's waiting to go, she's shown up, she's signed up. It's 1986, whatever it is, and she's sitting on the side like this, like looking down. And there's a guy there, cauliflower ears, busted nose, scars on his face. And we, people say don't judge books by covers, but we do. We all profile. So if I go, Bedros, there's 10 people doing a seminar, who are you gonna bet on? You see the guy there that's, jacked and because you look at the guy and you look at the scars on his face and the broken nose and you go, that guy's probably got 100 fights. It doesn't occur to you, maybe he has no defense, which is why he's so fucked up, right? We don't flip it like that. We go, wow, that guy looks experienced.
Right.
I've seen guys like that roll over in a scenario because they get scared, because it's not starting off like sparring. It's not starting off like their door confrontation. We would build the scenario and then intelligently get to the big bang moment when there's a confrontation. When we spar, if you and I are going to box, we tap gloves, and if we are going to grapple, we start on our knees, we start in position, we start in a clinch. Real fights don't happen like that. You're putting something in the trunk of your car, you hear a footstep and someone goes, hey, you turn around, like
whack,
like something just happens. So the emotional, psychological impact, and this is what I said earlier, your reptilian brain gets hijacked by your survival system in a high stress situation. Executive function says, well, I would never be that close. I've got head on a swivel and shit like that. And we've got always the contrarian that says that sort of thing. And I go, do we know in the history of the world of a police officer or somebody in the military that's been ambushed, captured, surprised?
Well, especially recent times, yes. Right?
But forever. I go, if hunters of men who are trained can be surprised, why can't good Samaritans?
What leads to that? Are we just like so desensitized or believe that the town I live in is safe, or it won't happen to me because that stuff like that happens to others. Like my whole life, I've always felt like something's going to happen to me.
Right.
2 years ago, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, shout out to Dr. Gabby, out of New York, Manhattan. So Jason Redman, former Navy SEAL who face was all shot up. He wrote a book called The Trident. He's like, dude, you're pretty jumpy. You might want to talk to my doctor. I'm like, that's weird. He's like, have you ever had any PTSD or whatever? I'm like, no, man, I haven't been to war. I'm not
right.
like you, right? He's like, have you ever had any concussions? I'm like, well, yeah, I've had several concussions. He goes, dude, just go talk to my doctor. So he introduced me to Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. She does a brain scan. I go to New York. We just happen to be visiting New York on a family vacation anyway. So I'm like, hey, I'm coming out in April for spring break with the kids and the family. And I go to her office. She scans the brain and does all the blood and urine and whatever tests and gives me results. She's like, you're like a 10 on fight or flight. Like that part of your brain is just like lit up like a Christmas tree. And I was like, holy crap. I've always felt that way. And I've always felt like something's going to happen. And I don't walk around town, no matter what town I'm in, thinking like, hey, we're in a safe neighborhood, everything's okay.
Right.
I've always got like a first aid kit, contingency, I'm packing a knife, or if I can, I have whatever I need to.
Scanning, you're doing
Yeah. And, but I always knew that I'm not normal, but I realize now my fight or flight is lit up. It now seems like most everyone else, their shit is just turned off, which both extremes are probably not good. Because I know my adrenals are like tapped and I have to do all the right stuff to keep myself in a healthy balance. Then on the flip side, if you're not at all self-aware,
Right.
spatially aware, socially aware, like that can't be healthy either. What gives?
It's, that's interesting. Are you on a personal note, are you getting, I had my cortisol checked a few years ago and the doctor called and said, why aren't you dead? Because your things like, I'm like you, man.
Thankfully, she said I process cortisol well.
Yeah.
And it's because she's got me on the right amount of stuff like magnesium and all that stuff to sleep well. And I stopped drinking caffeine at 12 o'clock, down to 1 coffee a day. Like I do all the right stuff, hot tub and roll, and I check off all the boxes that I need to sleep well. So I manage my stress, cortisol well, thankfully. But like that freaked me out. And it also told me a lot about myself, why I'm so jumpy for no reason.
But if you have that self-awareness, you can improve the critical thinking around it. So when if that's just how you're wired and there's certain things you can do to mitigate it, I was about to say medicate it.
I've also tried medicating in the past, yeah.
But to mitigate it, that because now you can also go, you know what? Sundays I go for a hike, not negotiable. I'm getting out in nature. I'm going to do jiu-jitsu 3 times a week, which was better than doing extra emails 3 times a week. As long as you're doing stuff. I think there's a problem when you like I realized, I teach 5 times a week now and started that in March. And I realized how much I miss that like I'm doing these 45-minute classes that go almost 2 hours. Right.
45-minute classes that go almost 2 hours.
And I'm telling people, okay, class is over. If you need to leave and go to work, fine. But if I stop teaching, I'm going to go look at spreadsheets and answer emails and do business calls.
Right.
Please ask me another question. And I'm like begging them because I realize like that's where I feel most balanced, most calm is when I'm teaching. And so it's having the self-awareness to recognize what is your true nature, but then having the self-awareness to realize, okay, I need to take a break. And in your case, it might go, I need to go shoot a gun. I need to go for a run. I need to, like train more. So you find ways to do that as opposed to like try to change who you are and how you are to fit someone else's model in a book.
Are you a violent person, Tony? Because you seem like, I know you.
Right.
And it's not like I've known you for a decade. I think we're going on 2, maybe 3 years of a friendship. You don't seem like a violent person, but is there a Tony that I don't know who's a violent, mean person? Because why do you walk around like trying to weaponize the fear flinch response?
That's a cool question. I abhor violence, which is why I studied it. When I was a kid, as a skier, I was afraid of wiping out. I was afraid I'd be skiing. What if I hit that tree? What if I do this as a wrestler? What if this happens? What if, it was always negative. And I was really good at all this stuff. I was a world-class skier. I was a competitive wrestler. But I always carried and some people say like that sabotage thing, but it wasn't sabotage. Like I showed up and I went hard, but I was like thinking, why, if I'm so good, why am I so scared? And it was this fearful energy. And so when that fight happened when I was 12 and I started doing martial arts, I felt so centered, but it was almost like, is this the panacea that's gonna fix me? And it didn't. And so vicariously through my students, I was like experimenting like they're my guinea pigs on these ideas for managing fear and understanding fear. But I also realized that like I abhor violence so much that I found a way to study it in a holistic way, emotional, psychological, physical, that keeps me away from it. I've had, you've had the good fortune as you've grown your business and evolved your business, start working with a lot of ex-mill guys and meeting mill guys. So I've been doing, working with these guys, for decades, and they'll send me things like that aren't on CNN, right? Not classified stuff, but they'll send me, check out this video. I've never opened a video of a beheading, of an ambush, ever. I was training the cops down in Killeen, Texas, when that big massacre happened, and the guy there says, "Hey, we've got the CCTV footage of this. If you want to see this, what actually happened there." And I was like, "Nope." He goes, "But like, you're a scenario design guy. Why would you want to see it?" And I looked at these guys and I go, I don't want to look and see helplessness in somebody's eyes. And so when I'm working with somebody, whether it's an individual, whether it's a family, a seminar on Zoom, corporation, whoever, I'm going, I don't ever want you to be helpless. And so I study violence and I practice violence so that I never don't know what to do.
Makes total sense. Ain't that interesting? So going back to, before we finish up on the fear loop, which is going to be a great way to close, why did you decide that you want to work with more citizens, civilians, and kind of, as you continue to work with military, which is awesome, but why go into the civilian citizen space?
I think, so years ago I moved out of it because I was just so tired of the apathy. Oh, it'll never happen to me. Never happen to me. I think in the last 2 years, there was this convergence in my brain of what we really had developed, that there were things I was doing in the 80s that in the last 10 years, neuroscience has started to explain about how to hack the brain, how to hack learning, how to not hack in a hack sense, but in a positive way. How do we improve retention? How do we speed up learning? And they're describing certain like world leaders talking about how the brain is like a hard drive, but there's also anticipatory cells. We're trying to predict the future, how interleaving effect can speed up. And I was like, as they're describing this stuff and myelinization of neurotransmitters, if you do this, and I was like, oh my God, they're describing the intent of all these drills that I was doing in the 80s and 90s. And it made me realize that with the right language, I could articulate it differently. I didn't know how to tell somebody back then. So it was only in the last couple of years where I said, look, if I pick up my water and I throw it at you and your hands do that, I can explain now that your startle flinch because you're a human weapon. You just don't realize it because you've been domesticated. But you're a human weapon. And size matters in a fight. But size can't matter because you're not going to be bigger or smaller in your fight, right? Mm-hmm. And so I started having all these ideas where I went, okay, be your own bodyguard, which I created that in the 80s and then dropped it because I got so frustrated. And I've now brought it back, dusted it off, and said, Be Your Own Bodyguard is back in business. Why? Because you may be able to afford or tell Ray and Jason, hey, I'm gonna have a couple of drinks tonight. You guys are my bodyguards, right? You guys know anything about violence, right? These two like Navy SEALs, right? But most of the world's not going to have bodyguards. So who's
well, Ray's right up there drinking with me,
right?
So
that's true. So,
I end up having to defend him,
right? But like who's the bodyguard for your kids, right?
You're right.
It's your wife when she's with them. It's you when you're with them. And so when I started to figure it out, I went, now I understand what I'm doing. I can articulate why this drill works. So when our body flinches, it's like an organic airbag. You don't need to train it. If I throw something at you, your hands come up, your fingers splay, your arms start to go out. I have created a series of drills that teach people this quarter extremity explosive movement that will turn someone's head into a Pez dispenser. Someone goes to grab you and you just smash out. It turns, but the most important thing is managing fear. Well, the whole No Fear program, the KNOW program, we teach people how to change their relationship with fear, how to turn fear into a fuel, how to make it cathartic. So now that I've refined the fear part and the startle flinch conversion part, that's what was missing in Be Your Own Bodyguard. Be Your Own Bodyguard back in the 80s and early 90s was more of a complex motor skill self-defense. Now it's a primal gross motor move that I can teach anybody if they have an open mind. We even have, like in our courses, pro fighters come to it. Like, I had a guy who now works for me. He was a pro Thai boxer for 10 years. His girlfriend wanted to do it. So here's a guy, you got to see his nose. Like, it's so fucked up, right? So he's there like this at the class. His girlfriend, he's married to her now. I want to go do this. I want to do this. Okay. He comes in. But he's like thinking, he's been a martial artist for 30 years.
Right. What are you going to teach him?
What
he doesn't know?
And you got to hear his interview. We interviewed him after because he was like, this is now 3-4 years later, he works for me teaching. And he said, look, I'm a pro Thai boxer. I need to teach this stuff. So I created a self-defense program with the same focus and efficiency, I said it earlier, of a paramedic teaching first aid. Learning how to put on a tourniquet, stop the bleeding, right? Like you're buying time for a paramedic who's buying time for a doctor. And I tell people when the contrarian goes, you can't learn self-defense in a day. I've been studying XYZ martial art for you. Don't confuse the study of an art and a system with this. That'd be like a doctor coming into my self-defense class going, what is this bullshit? I went to medical school for 7 years and we're not teaching heart surgery here.
Right.
We're teaching simple stun and run tactics, how to manage fear. But the most important stuff we do, Bedros, is teach people, listen, every victim of violence who lived to tell the tale said they had a bad feeling before the attack. I want to say that again. Every single victim of violence who lived, everyone I've interviewed and every book I've read anecdotally said, I had a bad feeling before the attack. But they didn't have the courage or the insight to act on that. And so you ask me, why don't people cognitive dissonance? I'm okay. This can't be. I'm not being followed. I know this person. All the things that shut down when your spider sense says something's wrong. We tell people the most important thing we teach people in our seminars is how to choose safety. And it's interesting. People at a superficial level, people go, he's teaching people how to fight. I'm not teaching people how to fight. I'm teaching them how to not fight.
Actually teaching them as I see it and as I know it, you're teaching us how to think.
Yes,
how
correct.
to think in a situation that we're not often in, but those small little times in life, should we find ourselves in it,
Can change everything.
you better know how to think.
Right. You don't have like you can't do do-overs. This isn't like golf and a mulligan. Like it's like, and so, but the most important stuff here is the stuff we do, and I break it down into 4 stages. If every victim of violence who lived to tell the tale said they had a bad feeling, that means there was a fear spike. There's an intuition. And when we do our No Fear lecture, we talk about intuition whispers in your ear and then fear says, shut up. Oh, God, I got this, right? And it's like your intuition's going, what does it cost you to check out your intuition? 0. What could it cost you if you ignore it or shut it down? Everything. You've been screwed in business, guaranteed. After when the dust settled, you went,
Yep.
I had a bad feeling about that guy.
Yep. 1,000%.
And multiple times.
Multiple times. You said
Right.
words out of my mouth multiple times.
Right?
Yeah.
So imagine, and so this is the first thing we teach people.
Because we all have an idealized view of how we want things to unfold.
Right.
How I want a business partnership to unfold. How I want to live in the city that I adore so much. We forget that bad people can come into good cities and do bad things. Just like people with great intentions can become your business partner, but over time they could go rotten for whatever
and
reason.
you, like me, you're a coach. You're romantic, right? You see that I could build this, I can do this, I
Yeah.
can fix this.
Yeah.
So, I've been around me, where Jesse will say, I knew that was going to happen. Why didn't you tell me? Because you're stubborn. You wouldn't have listened to me anyhow. You go through it. But for the self-defense realm, if I can share something, if you never get a chance to train with me, trust your gut. We now know that your gut is your second brain, right? So this whole trust your gut. If your intuition says, check this person out, it could be business, it could be a relationship, but most importantly, something to do with your safety, check it out. There is zero downside to ignoring, to choosing safety. Ignoring it could be a huge downfall. You could lose your business, but you're going to rebuild it. I'm going to rebuild it.
Yeah.
You get screwed in a relationship, you'll get over it. You'll find somebody else, right? But if it's a violent encounter, right? Bad guys only want one of three things: property, body, or life. It's a short list.
Oof. We don't like to think about it because it's just not like. So again, going back to Jason Redman, and he calls me. So right now as we're filming this, guys and gals, it is November 2nd,
Correct.
I believe. Yeah, November 2nd, 2020. And Jason Redman, about 4 months ago, he's like, "Hey B, do you have any go bags?" I'm like, "No, sir. I've got, I got my rifles, I got my pistols, we got extra water, but everything's kind of spread out. We got no go bags." He's like, "Well, what happens as we started seeing those peaceful protests turn into somewhat peaceful protests, turn into riots?" I was like, "Shoot, you make a good point." And he goes, "Do you have 3 or 4 ways to get to some kind of a rural foresty area that's high ground?" I'm like, "Shoot, I don't. I know where I would go, but I only know the one way." He's like,
Right.
"What happens if that one way shut?" So all of a sudden he starts exposing all the flaws, right? And as I started putting together go bags, there's 4 of us in our family, and so 1 bag for each of us, and this person has food and that person has that, and some bags are redundant. My wife didn't like the idea of me doing this. "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Putting together the go bag." "Okay, great." Well, I go, "Hey, let me explain to you how this works and where the pistol is in this particular bag and where the trauma kit is. And can't you just do it? What happens if I'm shot? What happens if I'm dead? What happens if I got a broken leg? You have to go with that." And I realized then, like, many of us don't want to think about it. Mm-hmm. It's an ugly thing to talk about violence. Think about, what are the 3 things that bad guys want?
Property, body, or life.
All scary things I don't want to think about. Property, body. I don't want to lose property. Certainly don't want to lose
Body, something maimed,
Right.
maimed, injured, or
maimed,
killed.
injured, or hell, how about raped?
Right.
Right? And then life, I don't want to lose my life. So if I just don't think about it, it won't happen, right? And if it does, I just hope it's to someone else and not me. Well, the reality is, especially now, as we see, we're 2 days before the election, Mamma mia. Like, they're building a fence around the White House right now, and I'm hearing from friends that the National Guard is on standby now for up to a 1 week deployment. And so, until they get to you, what are you going to do to deploy for your family now? Is what I'm starting to ask myself. But so, in finishing off, how does someone connect with you, learn from you, train with you, or at least get the lessons from you?
Obviously, we're all online to do stuff. It was one of the pivots we did recently. So we put our No Fear course online. I work with a ton of self-defense and martial artists. I realized that when we refurbished the whole program and said, okay, be your own bodyguards, ready to go, I can't, again, do it myself. So we have a program. We've got hundreds of affiliates around the world that take our Train the Trainer course. We've got online training for that and in-person training when the world opens up again. And then depending on what they want, if you said to me, you got like 3 phases. We've got No Fear, K-N-O-W fear, not spelled N-O fear, right? Get to know fear. There's no fear. There's the Be Your Own Bodyguard, Weaponize the Startle Flinch, the whole SPEAR system, which is the science of studying the startle flinch and how to weaponize that. And then the high gear scenario stuff. And that's the whole, that's the whole thing. Like, so you'll go buy a gun, but if you don't do force on force training, you're not doing scenario. If you buy a gun, you go to the range and you shoot it a couple of times, you're not really thinking about scenarios. You haven't practiced clearing your house or protecting your family. And what most new gun owners don't do is ever think about what would it be like to shoot somebody, right? And so of the three things, the most important thing you could do is the no fear. I believe, and I tell people this all the time, and I've been saying this since 1985, that there are more people who have defended themselves every day through sheer will and indignation than there ever will be trained guys who get attacked and defend themselves. There's somebody getting attacked, they estimate every 3-4 seconds something's happening to somebody, property, body, or life. But you don't hear about that in the news because people get away. Nobody's running to the police station going, didn't get a good picture of the guy, don't know what he looks like, but I got away. Okay, thank you for coming in, sir. Thank you for coming in, ma'am. So the people that get away, those are the people that are trusting their instincts and intuition. So I would tell anybody, if this makes any sense to you, you're interested in that, go to our website, check out our stuff, contact us, and we do everything from, talking to, one of my most fun events was a dad, former Marine, who hired us. I brought in a bunch of trainers, and to him, his family, and his in-laws, it was like 7 people. They came to my house and booked us for a weekend, and we took them through the fear management, the weaponizing the flinch. We had my trainers in high gear, but we weren't sparring. It was like trying to grab somebody out of a car, like doing crazy shit. And here's the thing: we're not teaching people technique. I always tell people, don't confuse technical for tactical. Smashing somebody in the face is tactical. Wondering if you should do a straight punch or a hook punch or a finger jab, that's technical. And it's in those moments you can lose the fight. You need to just start moving. How do you start moving? We need to identify our fear. We need to manage our fear. We need to choose safety. What is the safest thing to do? Sometimes charging the threat is, sometimes disengaging is. All of those decisions happen up here. The mind navigates the body. And so the most important thing we do is the whole fear loop. Understanding that.
That's powerful. What's your website?
So we got a new one, BlauerTrainingsystems.com, which houses everything. So it's my last name, Blauer, Blauer, trainingsystems.com.
And of course, to those of you that really want to learn a lot of his insights and follow Tony, you can find him on Instagram. He's very active at Tony Blauer.
Yes, sir.
Right? BlauerTrainingsystems.com. And Tony, I can't wait for the world to open back up, unless you'd probably come in here and do it here in my gym. I guess we don't have to wait for the world to open up when I've got my own gym.
You do have your own gym.
Yeah, so maybe we can get a group together, or maybe you can just put me through but I would love to learn your strategies and just add that to my arsenal, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you, buddy.